toward the One, the perfection of love, harmony and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of guidance.
Welcome, everybody. This is the 9th class of the 10 on becoming human divine being. And I'm happy to say we're going to be speaking about the imagination tonight, or the imaginal faculty, we called it, which includes all those wonderful things like ta-wheel, being able to see that which is beyond the obvious in the world, all the realms that open up into our world. And we'll speak of much more together. And hopefully it'll be a way of consolidating some things that we've learned together. I wanted to begin with a poem. I felt, well, we can't read poems from books, current books, like I usually would do. So that desire then prompted me to write a poem. So I have a poem for you from me. Sight unseen. Sight unseen. Gifts from many realms shower us. Each moment freshly offered, breath upon breath full of promise. Wishes of angels, inspirations of jinns, reflections of archetypes. What more could you ask for? I'll tell you about that. Your part in the story, your strands of the tapestry, your heart yearns to give it. You've tried to give it away cheap, for pennies on the dollar. That most precious of the creation waits unnamed within you. It can only be claimed when spoken by you as the lover, looking into the heart of your own beloved. You and the revered one, pronouncing the same unwritten pledge, composed by two hearts who found themselves one. You may say, how do I get there? It seems so archetypal. My tools are so primitive, my goal so unclear. Then I say, plunge into your practice. Live ardently your life. Give both your time and deep attention. Then sitting on the edge of the union found there, find what calls to you with sweet love's breath. What opens itself like a flavor untasted, or a task once abandoned, now seen in new light. Your inner work has unfurled new blessings, gathered up new life tools, a promise of success, and new comrades in flesh and in spirit, ready for the challenge. You know them. The walls have fallen down just a bit, here and there. So begin. So we begin. We thought we'd make it so easy to remember that it's going to be 3 steps. And we call it ready, set, go. And everything in it should sound familiar and kind of harmonize with each other. Like good friends, golden friends, somebody calls it, that I know here. So what is the first step, which is called ready? Well, we're going from knowing ourselves in a reduced dimensionality, like being stuck to a 2-dimensional flat surface. This is our usual way of thinking in this 5-sense world. 5-cent world would be kind of a good way of talking about it. It's only worth about 5 cents because it needs to be enlivened by all that I was speaking of in the poem. So this 2-dimensional flat surface seems to be where we see things. It's as if we were all born looking into a mirror and thinking that what was real, the only thing that was real is the surface of this mirror. And things were really very different than they are. So what is the other state? The state not bound by that surface would be able to connect with other realms and many more possibilities. If you tuned in a little bit early tonight, you might have seen this design. Let's see here, that we had on the screen. That is actually a Shibori dyeing project of mine. That when I looked at it, I felt like, wow, this looks like the dimensionality that I was thinking about. It's the real dimensionality of our soul. And probably if I could make way more dimensions, it would be much more like it. But this gives kind of a feeling of what it's like to be in a situation that we've called multidimensional. And so we have other ways to talk about this too. Would you like to talk about it?
Well, to start off, many of you probably at some point read the book Flatland. And if you haven't, I would encourage you to read it. It's a wonderful little book. And it's about these two-dimensional beings. Their world is just two-dimensional. But there's a three-dimensional being that walks through their world. But all they can perceive is what intersects with the three-dimensional being in the two-dimensional world. So if a person's leg went through Flatland, they would see circular shapes of different sizes, smaller and larger. And as the person walked, they would perceive, well, there's a circle here, and now all of a sudden there's a circle over here instantaneously, and things that just didn't make sense from their perspective. But there were some wise beings in that world, and they figured out there must be a higher dimensional reality, and that's the only way they could make sense out of what they were perceiving. So we're kind of like those beings in Flatland, except we're in a three-dimensional world, as Ravani Ra was saying, the world of the senses, and we think that that's all that there is. And sometimes there's things that seem inexplicable, and sometimes we call them miracles. A miracle is something that doesn't fit in with our assumption about how reality operates. But if we had an understanding of a much deeper reality, it would be a perfectly normal phenomenon. So I've shared before, but I'll describe again the research of William Tiller, who has studied the effects of subtle energy. And he's designed many, many experiments, and you can read about them if you look them up on Amazon, William Tiller. But basically what he's discovered is anytime you do something that brings a linkage between subtle reality and what he calls ordinary reality, the space of ordinary reality is conditioned. That's his term for that. And what that means is it's now opened up into having more possibilities or degrees of freedom than were there before. So what is taken generally as gospel in physics is just basic assumptions about how the universe works. Some of these equations don't work the way that physicists thought that they worked once you bring in the subtle energy. For instance, entropy, which means disorder, which is supposed to always increase. Actually, in his research in these experiments, the disorder decreases, which is impossible by the assumed second law of thermodynamics. Note the word law, which means that's the way it is, but that's not the way it is once there's a contribution from subtle reality. And so in our process, in our journey towards awakening, we discover ourselves as beings that exist not just in the, you could say, three-dimensional flatland that we thought was all that there was, but actually we exist in higher dimensions as well. And there's many more degrees of freedom available to us. In fact, some serious physicists are postulating that this reality that we're in is a simulation, so that we can learn how to operate first in this simulation, but eventually learn how to function in higher dimensions of reality. The same thing the mystics say in different terminology. So we're actually learning how to awaken to the much broader reality in which we exist. But that's just the first step. Ronnie Ross we got 1, 2, 3. That's just the first step. Being able to perceive what's going on in these higher dimensions. And then the next step is, well, now what? What do you do? How do you operate? What are the possibilities that can take place?
More for one. I have more for number one.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so, and we're kind of underlining what each one is saying to kind of reinforce it and hopefully, bring it to a deep depth that's easily perceived. So this first step, ready, is also the human-divine relationship. It is also the sometimes the hall experiences that we have. Now, hall, if you remember, is a temporary moving up to a higher state, which often is the human-divine relationship. That means that all of a sudden we feel like we're in love. We feel like we are with the divine. We feel like we are seeing the evidence of the divine around us in nature. We are getting these beautiful images and poetry and new ideas and freshness that just seem to be coming through, and then they're gone. Sometimes we actually bring each other to that state and being with our friends, being with our teacher, being in this class. That's a hall experience of it, a temporary experience of it. And we talked before about making this state more adamant, or there's another word for it too, but an adamant is good. That's like working with metal and making it, as you move it and you pound it and you heat it and you temper it, right? And now it keeps the shape that it was given. So it would be like keeping the shape of the human-divine relationship. And really, makam would be the word for making it your usual state. Usual state would be called makam. So we want the human-divine relationship to become our makam, so that we really can become this human-divine in manifestation that can be answering for the divine, that can be telling the other half of the story that the divine has started. This echoing back, this returning of the gifts in this beautiful relationship. And each one of us, this is a quote from our wonderful spiritual body book, we each have our own activity and perfection, which are an effect and influx of the absolute activity of the soul of the world. So here's our uniqueness coming in, that no one, except for each one of us, each one of you, each one of everyone, has been given. Just like the diagram of the central sun and the lines coming down from it, each one of us has a little bit different combination of the qualities, different ishq or desires, different way of seeing things, many differences, so that they are irreplaceable and unique. And when each one of us is awakened, it brings so much more. Tell us about the math of that, when one more is added.
Oh, when you have a system, it could be tuning forks. And when you strike one, the other ones vibrate. And let's say you have 99 tuning forks in resonance with each other, and now you bring in one more. And you think, well, that one's going to make 1/100th the difference of the total effect. But in actuality, there's a simple formula. The difference in the total effect when these things are in relationship and harmony with each other is twice the total number. So this one added to it has 200 times as much effect as any one thing separately functioning. And so there's just a dramatic difference of what happens when many beings come into this state. We've talked in recent classes about the idea of harmonic relationship. and we've talked about relational unity, which we'll be talking about a little bit more this evening. But when we can be in that state, and what Ravani Ra was talking about, each of the rays from that divine central sun being a unique combination of qualities is quite true, but also each of our souls embodies a unique way of relationship. The way that we relate to anything in manifestation, to a level transcendent to us, to our personal connection with the divine, any way you want to direct it, that way, that modality of relationship is unique for each one of us. And that's a gift that each of us brings to the totality that can only come through us.
So are we ready about set?
Set.
Step 2? Okay. You want to start? Or?
So we've talked many times about the Barzakh, what we call the meeting place. And so we could say the Barzakh, in a sense, is the field or the landscape on which this relationship takes place between the manifest and the transcendent. But it's also the landscape in which the fruit of this relationship takes place, what's birthed from it, what comes from it. And we've talked before, now tonight we're weaving together many strands of things we've talked about in earlier classes. We talked about this man Bekenstein that talked about the Bekenstein bound, where he showed there's a finite limit to how much information can go in either direction whenever you have an interface between any two sides, or a screen, so to speak. Well, the Barzakh is like this. It's the interface. It's what enables this connection between the transcendent and the manifest to take place. But the more we've opened up into the multidimensionality, not just the awareness of that, but the actual experience of that in our being, then so much more can transpire in this Barzakh, in this meeting place, and we can much more be capable of furthering what our divine purpose is, to birth that which can only take place through us. And we might think, well, that means just me separated. No, this means through you in relationship with everything and anything, what comes from that.
I like to talk about this step 2 set as the magnetism, sensing what the magnetism is of this world that we find ourselves in, of the human divine. The magnetism, for one thing, meaning, just as Azarbash was saying, that things are birthed there, things are become the fruit and are gathered there in the Barzakh. And in fact, this is what our body, well, actually our whole realm is when the physical or material body falls away. It is also what is sometimes described by our ancient Sufis as the place between the soul itself, your own soul, and what you see as the manifest universe. So it's all the action, the unique activity and perfection that I was speaking about before, all the inspirations, but especially all the things that are gained through all of the whole history of our spiritual development, and also our interrelatedness with all the delightful souls that we know in life, and those that we awaken, and those that we, that teach us. That whole doing part of it, because now in the second stage, things have become more adamant, so that we kind of have learned the definitions of things, and hopefully there'll be this kind of adamancy coming through this class tonight, so that there's more understanding of who we are and how we work, so that we now can use the dynamism that we have. Ishq is also an important part of the set. That means that Ishq being the desire that we have, and the desire is really on all the different levels, depending on who we are identifying as. And we learn to, it's almost like if you think about desires as wines, you could say, well, we become wine tasters. We know much more about, well, this is a wine that, okay, it's fine, but we can set that one aside. And this one is much more all-encompassing and fruitful for everything in our lives. This is a great one. It's good for all of us, those that drink and don't drink, to, you know, speak. Well, this is how the Sufis talked. I don't know. But there are some that are the sweet essences that really call upon the deepest moments of our own lives. Those moments perhaps in which we had marriages with beings of the other realms, or that brought those beings into more manifestation, that they can be helping on the earth. Yes.
So talking about desire, we can even think about different directions of desire. So, or directions of pulls of desire. So we feel a pull of Ishq, a longing for the divine. It's like drawing our heart towards the beloved. So that's certainly a very powerful one. And in many traditions, that's pretty much the main thing. You follow that and you go back to the source and you merge, and there's a dissolving of any personal identity with the one infinite being. But in Sufism, there's other directions of this desire that are honored. And another direction, well, for one, is the desire that caused us to be created in the first place, the desire of the divine being to know him herself in a way that could only be known through us. And so how can that happen? Well, that can only happen by us progressing in manifestation, continuing to deepen the relationship in the Barzakh, not ending it by going back to where we came from, but unfolding it more and more. And you might think, well, could there be anything more than that? Well, there's actually a third. And this one I call the eliciting light of Sophia. It's something that is pulling from our relationship with the divine, this harmonic relationship we have between our human and divine aspects, that's drawing forth a new creation that is born through this relationship, that could not happen solely through our human side, could not happen solely from the divine side, but can only happen through the coming together of these two sides, and then something is born from that. And that has everything to do with creativity, and we're going to be talking about Hima in a little bit, so I'll say more about it then.
Mm-hmm. So we had ready, step 1, and set, step 2. So step 3 is go. So now we might have had this relationship grow within us of the human divine, and now we have more of an idea of what it feels like to be in that state, and we have more of the time we are in that state. And now we have the relationship with that desire within us, and know that that's the Barzakh in which this is happening. So we're kind of reoriented to the situation. Well, that can't be the end of it. We haven't really started the work here. Now we just know where we are and everything. So the go step is to use the tools, meaning all of our life skills, to do with the life that we related to a long time ago. And now, as it is evolved, many other tools, the spiritual life, availing ourselves of relationships with beings that have made themselves known from this new perspective. And of course, everything becomes new as our perspective changes. And this happens, we go through these steps, ready, set, go, many times, and on a new level. It's kind of like reading a poem again and go, wow, that wasn't in the poem last time. Well, yes, it was, but we just saw it differently this time. But now we see our tools and the friends and our possibilities in a whole different way. You wanted to talk about Windows and
Well, so uh, those of you that have had many, many computers over the years, which is probably quite a few of us, can probably think back to the earliest versions, and pretty much all you could do some word processing, and then the just crude beginnings of the internet came along, and you could actually, it was kind of like texting, only it was very slow. You could type something, and then a little while later, somebody would respond, and then you could send little pictures. And over the years, of course, the operating system of computers has evolved tremendously. So if you have Windows now, it's Windows 10. If you have a Mac, it's whatever the latest operating system of the Mac computers use. But if you don't know what to do with all the features, or even very many of the features, then most likely all you're going to be doing, which may satisfy your needs, is some word processing, store your photos, look up stuff on the internet. But there's many more things that you could be doing. And now there's different kinds of platforms in which you can experience virtual reality, uh, some goggles you can put on where you don't even have to be tethered to a computer, and you find yourself in a very realistic looking world where you can interact with what you are experiencing. Well, that's pretty cool. That's certainly a far cry from just where it started from. But imagine probably far into the future, they'll have some kind of way that the interface can pick up on what you're thinking, and it can produce the images and experiences of what you're thinking. Well, this is what happens when you have a lucid dream. When you're dreaming, but you realize you're dreaming, and now you're the director. You can change it into anything instantly. You can fly, you can be on Jupiter. Uh, you're like a god of the universe, of this world of your dream. Well, I think what happens as we awaken, that we become capable of participating in the lucid dream of God, which is existence, but it's much more than existence uh, in the Flatland version that we think that we're in. It's the world that has opened up by virtue of this relationship between the two sides in the Barzakh, what has unfolded in that. And so when we're creative, uh, what's the evidence that we see of our creativity? If you're an artist, you can show somebody a painting or a sculpture or something that you've made, or you can show someone a dance you've created or play music that you've created, and so on. So the expression of your creativity is taking place in the same realm that you think you're in, just that. But if it's a real inspiration, it's only come about by virtue of the fact that you've been in this relationship, this harmonic relationship in the Barzakh, and something has come through the meeting of the two sides, and now you've made it tangible. You've made it a reality in whatever your way of expressing it is. And so you've made that divine creative impulse a tangible reality.
so you could imagine now, if you have the eyes of the world beyond, or the eyes that we were talking about before, to see in the Barzakh, you might see what you have created being one thing, uh, perhaps even an opera, or perhaps a beautiful piece of art. But what it looks like in the Barzakh may look way different than that. It might be like a fountain, or it might be like a cathedral, or it might be, let's say, an easygoing sidewalk that people can walk upon because of the compassion of your heart. The different qualities that were working within you in creation of this, create things in the Barzakh. It creates that world that you will live in, and not only yourself, but other beings, and not only for the hereafter. These things can be felt in the world that we live in now, because there's a reflecting going on between that Barzakh and this world of the five senses. And so it does have its effect. So sometimes the pieces of art, let's say this beautiful piece here by Les Glaze of the sun and probably a sunset, might have affected beings in this world through the experience that he had in creating it. It's a beautiful harmonics. This is harmonic, not only in the harmonic perception, but harmonic relationship, that through you as the being that inhabits these worlds, there is a harmonizing and a change of conditions in the worlds. Because a part of this that is really foundational, and we've spoken about many times, is the idea of recurrent creation. That the way we usually think about, oh, there was a big bang, and then, and then these things happen, and we're way down in the creative process. It all started way long time ago. Well, no, that's not how that we are understanding things as Sufis. We have the idea of the recurrent creation, that it's all being created now. It is all being created. And so what does that mean? That means that you have this opportunity to get in on the creation. It's, if we don't get it, if we haven't made this adamant in us, then we have a very limited way, ability to effect all of these changes. But if we continue to grow and understand and give ourselves to our dear one in the beloved relationship, and use all the things that come to us, it's not just for us to enjoy, the moment of having something wonderful and hearing an angel or something. All of this goes together in an amazing process, which is you as a part of this whole universe that that figures out that creation is continual, and you are an important part of that.
And when we have these creative experiences that we bring through, and well, for one, we've talked before about, and we even had some practices of perceiving everything as being Gabriel, revealing its true nature, and we had a practice of experiencing ourselves as Gabriel, what's revealed only through us. But this, the way that we express, make tangible this creativity that arises in the Barzakh, in a sense, we could say it's a translation. We're translating something that may be beyond any words, but when we have an experience, our consciousness, I won't say our minds, because this is even beyond, I think, the level of the usual way our brains operate, like to organize into something that we can relate to. Otherwise, it would just be, we'd blank out. Maybe we would bliss out, which is very enjoyable, but there wouldn't be anything really brought back from that. So it's translated. Well, what does that mean? Well, it becomes part of the allegory of our soul. And we can look at the allegory of the soul of great beings, their beautiful poetic descriptions of their soul's journey through the realms, through the Barzakh, and so on. We can look at the scriptures, which is all in parables and metaphors, and Gita, Bhagavad Gita. Gita means song, poetic imagery seeking to express something that is far beyond words, but it's, when it's really comes through, it's just at the farthest reaches of what we can grasp in our usual way of understanding, and it triggers something in us. It's I think, and I'm just thinking about this for the first time right now as I'm saying it, the same effect that happens when subtle energy comes into ordinary reality and opens up possibilities. When we come across something that is an expression of sacredness, it could be an actual icon, it could be an artistic creation, it could just be someone's being that has really awakened that in themselves. That opens up that in ourselves, that opens up access to that transformed world in which we find ourselves. It's like instant tawil, instant revelation of a much deeper level reality, and it's not, there's no effort involved into that. It's just something is such a clear expression of the reality that it symbolizes that when someone comes into a state of harmonic relationship with that, you can't help but open up into what's been communicated through that, the revelation that that's an embodiment of.
Beautiful. I'm going to read the way that Ibn Arabi said a very similar kind of thing in describing what the function of Hima was. This is in his Creative Imagination, or Alone with the Alone by Henry Corbin. It is the function of Hima, utilizing the imaginative faculty to perceive the intermediate world, and by there raising the sensory data to a higher level, to transmute the outward envelope into its truth. And here's the part that I really hear in what you said. So permitting things and beings to fulfill their theophonic function. Theo meaning God, phonic, the bursting forth of that energy into into the world, so that things and beings now can fulfill their function that they were given, by God in the beginning, you could say, or by the creation as it unfolds, to bring God's revelation into the world, to bring God in this unique way that each one of us is. But you said it in a different and new way that is wonderful, and that's what we're talking about. I think it'd be a good time for us to open it to everybody. And
well, let me read one more thing
okay.
first. So this is something that I wrote in preparing for this class. We are opening up who we always have been, a spiritual body. We are a path of the divine in life, making God a reality, not returning to the transcendent, formless beyond name and form. We become the adamant expression of the unique divinity enabled through our soul in existence. I'll read that again. We become the adamant expression of the unique divinity enabled through our soul in existence. Okay.
So hopefully this triggered some things in you all, and we'd like to hear.
Just a second here. And one moment.